So why am I here? This is the tough part. Storytelling versus story playing. Like, pretty catchy title, you know, but what the hell does that mean? I'm not even sure yet. Because when I was asked to do this talk, we had just ramped off of the DLC production when I was officially working on that as a narrative game designer. And, you know, I guess this is the best way for me to segue into this. Depending on who you ask, you're going to get very different definitions of what a narrative game designer does or is. At Eidos Montreal, they're predominantly more traditional storytellers. They're writers. So you're going to do a lot of dialogue, you're going to do a lot of character sketching, and you're going to do a lot of basically assuring that the integrity of the narrative is upheld throughout the integration process. Unfortunately, you're not going to do a lot of nitty-gritty, crunchy game design work. Even though game design is in the title, it's really not your responsibility. And I kind of found myself suddenly uncomfortably distanced from what I was really, truly passionate about. So I had kind of like this midlife crisis or mid-career crisis suddenly where I was like, what happened? You know, I was a level designer, I loved what I was doing, and I'm a narrative game designer, and I love that too, but I'm not doing exactly what I want to do. And so I sat down with my boss at the time, Mary DeMarle, who's now the writing director for Eidos Montreal, and I told her my plight. She heard me out, and she said to me basically kind of words that sort of, I guess, put everything into perspective. She said, so you want to be a game designer? And I said, you know, is that going to let me do what I want to do? And she says, well, here, yeah, it will. So I've axed the narrative part of my previous title, which I think we corrected that on the slides, thankfully. So technically, I'm just a game designer right now. But I guess long story short, this whole storytelling versus story playing thing, I kind of came full circle because for the last few years, I've seen things from sort of both sides of the spectrum. I've been in game development as a writer, and I've been in game development as a level designer. Two jobs that essentially are trying to do the same thing, at least when it comes to RPG, but they're coming at it from very different directions. They're going parallel, but they're on different sides of the fence. And I think storytelling versus story playing, for me, this talk was going to be sort of about defining those two disciplines and seeing how we could somehow sort of bridge the gap, you know, to get the game designers, to get the level designers, and to get the narrative designers sort of like talking, copacetic, and to get that sort of like that great sort of compelling gameplay and compelling storytelling in perfect harmony, you know, like chocolate and peanut butter. And, you know, so I was going to go into this great debate, go talk about narratology versus ludology. I was going to use some, you know, past information or experience I have in like film history to draw parallels between 20th century film industry and the industry we have today in the game industry. And then I realized very quickly that, yeah, I was going to bring you all into the promised land. You know, I had unraveled the Pandora's box. I had the perfect solution. I was going to bring you all into the promised land with me. And it was going to be fantastic. And I would stand here before you to thunderous applause and adoration. But I quickly realized, you know what? I don't really know what I'm talking about yet. You know, the solution is not simple. It's not an easy, there is no quick fix. It's a very complex situation. So, I mean, again, what do I know? I mean, really. So I had to sort of go back to the drawing board and reanalyze or, you know, rethink what I was going to basically talk to you guys about. So with that said, why should you care? I mean, why shouldn't you all just sort of like get up and basically walk out of the theater right now? Like, what the hell does this guy know what he's talking about? So I'm going to talk about what I know, which is stories within stories. Basically, as I mentioned, I worked on side quests for Deus Ex Human Revolution. So I'm going to basically walk you guys through a sort of retrospective analysis / post-mortem of the side quest development on Human Revolution and sort of give you guys some insight into how we went about building basically a better side quest. And at the same time, go over sort of what went well and what didn't. And if time permitting, I might, if I can, wax a little bit poetic about what I believe was truly sort of, what was the secret sauce? What is that sort of unquantifiable element that made Human Revolution the success that it was? So a quick primer as far as what is Human Revolution. For anyone who actually hasn't played the game or might not be too familiar with it, I'm going to play a trailer. This is our launch trailer that we released leading up to the launch of the game.
Where is this leading me? What have I become? Am I more than human? Or less? This technology, this strength, the temptation to misuse it is hard to resist.
If he stick his head out, Tai Young Medical is gonna chop it off.
Am I strong enough to stay human?
Be careful, Adam. Because everybody lies.
They're organized and they operate over and above society.
I won't rest until I find the truth.
That was our launch trailer. Made a pretty big splash. I hope anyone who hasn't actually picked up and played the game yet might kind of encourage you to go try it out, because it's a great game. And I think that trailer really hit on a lot of the big points. I mean, Deus Ex, it's a prequel to a classic. Not just a classic, a seminal classic. I mean, it's probably the most critically acclaimed game of all time. The game is essentially, it's a hybrid. It does a lot of things. You saw a lot of different types of gameplay in there. But it tells a story. It tells a pretty compelling story. It tells the story of Adam Jensen, who is basically an everyman who works or was caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. He was a security specialist for a high-profile biotechnological manufacturing firm with a lot of Department of Defense contracts and whatnot. And he suddenly finds himself caught between a rock and a hard place. He's mortally wounded, finds himself on death's door, and is basically resuscitated and revived with this technology that he was protecting against his will. And with that, with his new lease on life, he finds himself embroiled in this global conspiracy to which he somehow plays a key role. So that's the story in a nutshell. And the game, as far as gameplay is concerned, it's a hybrid FPS RPG. Multi-solution structure was a core mandate. I mean, like every environment, every level, every hub had to have and support multiple ways to proceed through the environment. If there was a puzzle of some sort, whether it was a combat or if it was stealth or what, there had to be multiple solutions. And it's all about choices and consequences. We track and we tabulate everything that the player does, and we reflect on it in some way. These are sort of the cornerstones of the original. And I think we executed pretty well on them because critically, as far as critics were concerned, we did pretty well. I mean, we're sitting at a 90% meta rating right now, which I'm really, really happy about. And that's on PC. I'm pretty sure we're roughly the same on PS3 and 360. So we executed across 3 platforms pretty damn well. And as you can see, like critics unanimously positive. You could also, I mean, it's pretty hard to please everyone, obviously. So user reviews are kind of unanimously positive, but obviously you can't please everyone. So there's a few guys in there saying, oh, I played your game for 60 hours, but it still sucks. Anyway, Forbes, we got Game of the Year from Forbes. Really proud of that. And a bunch of other, awards and whatnot. A lot of runner-ups, though. I guess that's just what happens when you release a game alongside Skyrim. The RPG genre was a tough battle this year. But if we were going to lose out to anyone, I couldn't have asked for a better opponent. So let's jump right into it. So building a better side quest. I'll start by just basically doing a quick rundown of what the core team was. We had a lead supervisor. I don't use the term lead side quest designer because unfortunately he was actually the lead technical level designer, which already is an immense responsibility. Fortunately, Patrick Garand, he was our lead supervisor. He took on the responsibility of basically taking the side quest team and sort of managing it, making sure that we kept on track, making sure that we met our goals, and obviously providing input and suggestions where he could. And behind that was we had one contract writer, who we actually unfortunately lost halfway through development. So if you sort of see a pattern happening here, it was sort of a skeleton crew. We had one gameplay programmer, but he wasn't actually officially assigned to side quests specifically. He was there to support level design. And we were officially level designers, but our responsibilities were still very, very different. And we were 2 level designers. So out of the 10 side quests, or 10 or 11 side quests that we shipped with, which I think came out to about 10 or more hours of gameplay, hundreds of thousands of lines of dialogue, recorded dialogue, all this stuff. This was essentially the team that produced sort of everything that was not a part of the critical path. And we're fiercely proud of that because we were kind of this commando team, off on the side, often left to our own devices, for better or worse, and we somehow managed to pull it all together. And that's what hopefully today I'm going to give you guys a little bit of insight into how we managed that. So the goal or driving philosophy, I think this was key. I mean, this was probably really ultimately what led us to our success. Vision cannot be understated how important that is. I think any successful project is going to have a core and fundamental vision of some sort. And the directors, to their credit, it was impossible for anyone on the team to not sort of be sucked up into sort of the vortex of their vision. It was so concrete and so strong. Mary DeMarle with the story, J.F. Dugas was sort of like the overall picture, Jonathan Jacques Balaté, the art direction, everything was just so bang on and solid. But when we sat down to start building the side quests, we were given a very, very early mandate, which was make it personal. So every side quest, more or less, had to, in some way, be about Adam Jensen. It had to be about either his past, his present, or his future. How is he responding to these new circumstances that he finds himself in? How does he feel about being maybe a little bit more than human, or does he still want to be human, or is he trying to be, elevate beyond just that? So it was always about making it personal, context and history, not just convenient circumstances. The second one was making it relevant. Player altruism is not an acceptable motivator. Adam Jensen is an important guy. He's got this global conspiracy unraveling around him. He's trying to save the love of his life. He's trying to figure out, who's conspiring against him. It's ridiculous to assume that he's going to take time out of his busy schedule to go help some damsel in distress find and rescue her cat from a tree or something, right? So any quest had to feel immediately relevant and contextually fit within sort of like what was happening in the critical path. Nothing could feel divergent, or nothing could distract the player from feeling like they were still focused on, Adam Jensen's major prerogatives. And the last was make it relate. It might sound obvious or cliche, but Deus Ex Human Revolution is ultimately a story about transhumanism. It's a story about Adam Jensen, and it's a story about how technology plays a role in our society, not just today, but in the future, in 2027. And these were the major sort of themes or beats that we always had to hit on when we were sort of prototyping these side quests. It had to be ultimately, like I said, it sounds cliche, but Human Revolution is a story about people. It's about the human condition, So anytime we were designing any side quest, it always had to have a human component. We had to allow the audience or the player in some way to relate, so that he felt like the questions that we were presenting, the themes that we were showing him, were relevant to his day-to-day life in some way, and in order to make them think, to raise some difficult questions. I would love to go into more depth, but I'm going to have to keep this pretty high level. The Alpha Crunch, before we began actual production, we all sat down. When I say all, I mean the contract writer and myself and the other level designer. We all sat down in a meeting room and we started hashing out what would be some great, cool moments that we could do for side quests. It always centered around one sort of great big wow moment. For instance, in the side quest Rotten Business, you have the option of disposing of this horrible sort of drug kingpin pimp guy by faking his death, making it look like a suicide by dragging his corpse to a balcony and throwing him off into the alleys below. That was like, hey, and that was born from the fact that I knew we had the ability to drag corpses, and what could we do with that? Like how could we put a twist on that and make some compelling gameplay around that? So we drafted out what essentially became 21 side quests. We had 21 side quests drafted before we went into actual integration. And out of those 21 side quests, as many of you may or may not know, we ended up with 10. So I'll tell you how we got to those final 10, but a lot of that had to do with this, what I call the alpha crunch. So basically 2 weeks, 2 side quests. The first week was the brainstorming phase. We took our initial concept and we hammered it out as much as possible. We got everything we could into what was basically a design document for that quest. And we split it in half. So our contract writer would start by doing the first draft on the document where he got all the characters, all the NPCs, their story arcs and whatnot, all the major beats as far as plot was concerned into this document. And then we would follow that up with our end of the bargain, which was integrating all the gameplay components. So everything from like what NPCs did we need, what kind of setups did we need to support, the combat, the scripting, trigger volumes, objective locators, the objectives, everything. All that had to be planned and penned out in advance. It even got to the point, because I was actually teaching myself how to script at the time, I would literally write in the document what I intended to script, sort of like a really high-level version of that, final code and whatnot. And then I would bring that to one of the programmers, and he would look at it and be like, "You're off your rocker," or "Hey, good job," and here's how I can help you out. So the next step was gym class, basically, where we would take this blueprint, and we had 1 week to basically integrate the quest in a really rough pass. But every major component, every major element of that quest had to be functional and fully featured. Obviously, it was all placeholder art, and as you can see, it's just a big sort of orange void. But we would get everything we needed into there so that you could play through the quest, someone could sit down, start the quest, and get through the entire thing without necessarily running into any snags. Obviously, we have to make some exceptions, but for the most part, quests would be built entirely in 1 week. Some quests were a little bit more ambitious. We had to go over, maybe it took 2 weeks or 3 weeks, but for the most part, we always stuck to this 2 side quests, 2 weeks. 1 side quest per designer, and the contract writer doing the dialogue and everything for both. After about 3 months, we had 10 side quests up and running. And at the end of that 2-week period, we would have a green light meeting with the directors. And they would basically run through the quest. They would see if we were hitting the right beats, if our intents were fitting in with the overall vision and whatnot. And then they would basically give us the green light. And that's when it was time to basically port the gyms into the alpha build. And I use the art of Zen to describe that process, because it was probably an unmitigated disaster. We went from like quick turnarounds to integrating quests within a week or two to it basically, for all intents and purposes, I think we built the quest twice. What should have been a really, really simple process of basically just importing all of our assets and scripts and entities and whatnot into the alpha build in their final environments it was impossible. We actually had the feature, it just didn't work, and we didn't have the resources to make it work. So that was, a pretty stressful period. But in the end, we got the 10 quests that we had in. We had sort of contingency plans for the remainder of the quest we didn't have time to get in. We sort of like, well, if we can get through sort of like the alpha crunch quickly enough, we might have time to bring these in. But we never got around to that. But we got to the point where it was time to take stock. And this is probably where we owe, I would say, 90% of our success to. This is sort of the most important thing we ever did. We did internal playtests. I sat down and I made a document, basically, which was just a quick questionnaire, and I went around to the team and I asked anyone who was willing to sit down and play the side quest and give me their feedback. And basically, feedback we got was like, "Hey, everything sucks, man." But we knew that already, because these quests are really rough. It's just to get a rough outline of what the intent is. See if we can nail that major gameplay moment. See if we can get that wow factor. But a lot of good feedback came out of this, other than, "Hey, everything sucks." We were able to isolate major sort of problem areas, and one of the big ones was the fact that we didn't have a writer anymore. Our contract writer had left the company, so we had this sort of like rough draft first pass dialogue throughout every quest, and we were really, really failing on that critical pillar to the Deus Ex experience, which is, well, we had stealth, combat, and we had social and hacking and whatnot. Our social was really, really falling short. So the next step, with hundreds of pages of feedback, was to isolate the really important variables from all that feedback and to create a match plan. And basically the objective of the match plan is to convince everyone that we can fix it. Taking that match plan and presenting it to the directors and the leads and telling them that, hey, it's not a sinking ship, we can salvage things, we can pull this off, but we need to do this, 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 and that in order to pull it off. And I have to give full credit here to our lead, who, like I mentioned, at the time, he was completely overburdened with his responsibilities as a lead technical level designer, but he still had the time in order to sort of pass on his expertise as far as building contingency plans was concerned. So we were able to, again, isolate all the key variables, things that we did well and things that we knew we could improve on moving forward. And at the same time, coming up with a plan for, well, if things just aren't going well, what can we cut to save, to not go down with the ship, basically. And that basically led to the road to beta. And the big mandate there was all killer, no filler. And I use the term, the art of war. Because it came down to attrition. It's no holds barred. And anyone I think here who's in the industry can attest to this. You might spend 2, 3, 4, 5 years on a game, but maybe only 20 or 30% of that actual production time, the game is when the game really, really comes together. And that sort of the road to beta is a testament to that. Because we worked our ass off. With the match plan, when we isolated the fact that the narrative had become so weak and compromised, we pitched to Mary DeMarle, who was the lead writer at the time. We said, we know how to fix this. You have to believe in us, though. You have to give us the green light to basically overhaul and rewrite 95% of the dialogue, which we did. She believed in us. She saw some potential. And that's when basically I kind of like changed my chapeau from level design to narrative game designer. Because within the course of 4 weeks, we had rewritten 10 side quests. We had actually doubled the amount of dialogue overall, and we really, really nailed the social element of the side quests. So what went well? Really quick, break this down, because we're getting short on time. The clear and focused vision, I already mentioned this. I mean, it was impossible for us not to understand what the goal, what the stakes were. And this is all attributed to really strong leadership from the directors. Hiding the side in side quests. Again, we had that mandate, make it personal, make it relevant, and make it relate. So side quests, they felt like these organic extensions of the primary narrative. They felt like little tendrils of intrigue that you would sort of stumble across as you were going through, the storyline. Willingness to compromise. Like I said, those match plans, those contingencies were crucial. It was always, always about quality over quantity. Like I said, we had 21 side quests planned. We only shipped 10. But is the game worse for that? It's not, because in the process of consolidating and analyzing what we could accomplish, we actually started borrowing elements, like great sort of moments from some of the other quests we couldn't fully realize, and incorporating those into some of the other quests to strengthen and leverage them. Treating the audience like adults. I think this is really, really what ultimately set Deus Ex apart from its sort of contemporary competition at the time. It always made sure that player agency was paramount. And that was something that we tried to put into the side quests as much as possible. And I think we really executed fully on that one. Ultimately, we never underestimate the player. It was sort of a mandate that I gave myself, to basically always second guess myself. I always operated under the assumption that someone smarter than me would be playing my content. So it forced me to basically question everything. Any design setup I made, I asked myself, am I asking the player to think? Am I presenting the player with enough options? Am I rewarding the player if he exercises those options? Am I rewarding the player if he does something I didn't even expect? So those were some of the key elements to what I believe led to sort of the side quest success. So looking forward, where could we improve? No more one-man armies. We were in a tough spot, obviously. It was an unproven team. We didn't really necessarily have any best practices in place. So we were really sort of flying by the seat of our pants. And I believe we could really learn a lot from the United States Marine Corps, because they have a power of 3 or rule of 3 philosophy to everything they do. They essentially have a corporal who's in charge of a fire team of 3 men. So if we had a lead side quest designer who was fully committed to integration of the side quest, who was in charge of, for instance, like a narrative game designer, a level designer, and then a mission scripter, I think the sky is the limit with what we could have produced under those kind of circumstances. Network protocol enabled DMZ. Communication is key. Silence is never golden. You have to, if you make a request for a feature or some kind of asset, you have to follow up on it. You can't assume that it's going to get done because you asked for it. And it's no one's fault that things fall through the cracks. It's endemic to production. It's such a huge process. There's so many moving pieces. There's so many moving parts in the development of a side quest. We use and require so much support from all of these different disciplines. It's immense. And better planning, period. So I mean, again, I was pretty inexperienced or unfamiliar with the tool sets and whatnot, but that's no excuse. You have to plan. Like I mentioned, all these moving pieces, all these dependencies on different disciplines, you have to account for them. If you have a character that you need voiced, you need to make sure that you have a document of some sort that gives a very quick, high-level overview of what that NPC is, so that you can give this to your sound guys. They know who to hire for a voice actor, and they can follow up on that. And when the voice actor gets into the recording studio, they can read this document as well and know immediately what they have to shoot for. And keep talking. I can't stress communication enough. I mean, it's such a key element. We learn to talk for a reason. Keep those lines of communication open. So the proof, I mean, the missing link, as I mentioned, I worked on that officially as a narrative game designer. It was really, the proof is in the pudding, because we had a very, very short window of development for that project, and I think we executed almost perfectly or flawlessly. It fell short in a few areas, but ultimately, I mean, considering the time we had, it was really impressive. We were a well-oiled machine. Remember that rule of 3 thing I mentioned with the United States Marine Corps and everything? I was a narrative game designer at the time. I was ultimately responsible for character drafts, getting the sort of the major plot arcs in place, and drafting and building all the conversation systems and all those graphs and whatnot. I could focus all my effort and energy on that and assuring that the conversations were engaging, fluid, and entertaining, and I could rely on the level designers to make sure that all the ingredients that were propping up that experience were in place and accounted for. At the same time, we had some focused mission scripters assuring everything was working. And actually, at the same time, with my experience from doing a lot of mission scripting on the side quests, I was actually able to leverage my expertise to take some of the burden off of the level designers at the same time. So there was a lot of great collaboration. Everyone's heard the term familiarity breeds contempt. Well, familiarity breeds content when it comes to game production. We are all familiar with the tools, and despite some new tech, we basically hit every single major milestone, and we always remained on schedule. Practice made perfect, or close to it anyway. We really improved our boss fights for the DLC. We had one boss fight, and it really kind of, it's so much more what it should have been, so that was one of our sort of success stories as far as the DLC was concerned. And basically, the DLC was like one big side quest. So a lot of my expertise on side quests helped leverage playability when we were sort of in the blueprint process and trying to figure out major plot points and whatnot. And like I said, so storytelling and story playing. From the beginning, it was all about leveraging interactivity. Whenever we were in a brainstorm meeting for sort of like the plot and whatnot, I was always trying to bring in the element of like, okay, so how is this plot point going to be played? How are we going to use this? A good example is there's a moment in the DLC where you have to find the location, or it's optional, the location of a bomb of some sort, and we clue the player into its existence through an overheard. And the overheard basically has 2 guards saying like, hey, did you get that email down to engineering? They need the passcode in order to open up the vents and whatnot. And the other guy is going to be saying, I'm going to get to it if you just give me a second and stop riding my ass. And they break, and one, the guard leaves, and then the other guard goes to his desk, and he starts interacting with his computer. If the player is smart and he overhears this and he doesn't interfere in any way, the NPC will actually write out his email and send it. And it's at that moment then, and only then, if you go and you knock him out and you hack the computer, do you get that key code. If at any point you interrupt that exchange, you won't have access to that code. So that's kind of like an example of incorporating the gameplay into the storytelling at the same time. When I started working on this presentation, like I said, I had that big sort of mid-career crisis and whatnot. I started, drawing parallels between sort of like the post-mortem for the side quests and the bigger picture, the post-mortem that the directors had written for the game as a whole. So, you know, it's sort of like we were a microcosm of the macrocosm, and we shared a lot of things in common as far as like what we believed were some of our successes and our strengths and our weaknesses. So I kind of like, it kind of certainly dawned on me that what I believe really truly led to the accomplishment or whatever we have achieved with Deus Ex Human Revolution is entirely attributed to something that our director mentioned in passing to me shortly after we shipped. And he said to me, Deus Ex Human Revolution, it was built with naivete. And moving forward, whatever we do, we're going to need courage for the next one. And this, I found, it really, I was kind of like, oh, that's kind of cool, you know, kind of insightful. But it didn't really sort of drive home for me until I kind of started reading about, not reading about, but I started thinking about, for instance, the state of the industry, you know. And I started thinking about how we're driving forward, and Deus Ex is a very narrative-driven experience, and we do a lot of things different from a lot of our competition. And I started thinking about, you know, like Citizen Kane, Orson Welles. With this quote, which I felt was really, really meaningful. Ignorance, ignorance, sheer ignorance. There is no confidence to equal it. It's only when you know something about a profession that you are timid or careful. And I read this and I was like, wow, you know, this kind of actually makes a lot of sense to me now, because when like I said, I joined the Deus Ex team, I really didn't know anything about AAA production. This was a whole new ballgame for me, but I never let that scare me. I never let that basically diminish my intent or my desire to make something awesome. I joined that team to make awesome side quests. That's what I wanted to do, and I believe I did it. I didn't let inexperience or ignorance hold me back. Basically, what I'm trying to get at is sort of the state of the union, the state of the industry. Like I mentioned, Deus Ex Human Revolution is a product of basically immense will and passion, because it is a franchise. The Deus Ex franchise, as I keep mentioning, it was dead, and no one thought it could ever come back or be revived. But somehow our team breathed life into a corpse. And I think that's because there's sort of this unfortunate reality that's plaguing the industry right now that's kind of like, you know, fear is the mind killer. I can't think of an environment worse for someone in a creative field than to be fearful of experimenting, to do something different, to do something dangerous. You can't allow that to sort of influence your design. So this might sound obvious, but with everything I said as far as like side quests are concerned, I think ultimately, as far as Deus Ex Human Revolution, the Missing Link DLC, and the side quests that I worked on, we owe most of our success to some pretty fundamental rules. The first one is vision, the second one is passion, the third one is compromise, and obviously raw talent and hard work. I put the two of them together because they're not mutually exclusive. You need both, otherwise you're not going to get anywhere. And you need passion because you're obviously going to run up against walls. And we ran up against a lot of walls, but we always managed to get around them. But if you don't have passion, you're not going to have the endurance to pull it off. And lastly, as J.F. Dugas in his Infinite Wisdom said, you need a little bit of naivete. Because I think when Orson Welles said ignorance, I think it's pretty interchangeable with innocence. Innocence is what gives you that sort of naivete to move forward and try something different, even though you have all the odds are against you and everyone's saying it's going to be an unmitigated disaster and the fans are telling you everything you do sucks and it's just going to be, you know, there's no way you're going to do what you want to do. You have to basically put on, you know, you have to have faith, you know, have a little naivete. So lastly, in closing, 3 constraints remain throughout development: our passion for this project, the love we put into it, and our commitment to make the best possible game. Despite the fact that Deus Ex Human Revolution is not a perfect game by any means, we like to believe it has a soul. So, yeah, thank you very much. My email's here if you want to contact me anytime.